Hi, my name is Peter Fisk. Leadership Recoded is really about having the courage to create a better future. The challenge really for all leaders today in business is not just to think about how can I create a better today, better performance, better operational results, but how can I create a better tomorrow? How can I lead the future? We live a time of so much change, so many opportunities in different ways that leaders need to have their heads up, not their heads down, and really be thinking about where are they going next? Where can they take this organization and how can they shape the future to their advantage? So leadership is really much more than about the traditional ideas of command and control, which we used to have many, many years ago. Today, I see leaders much more as people who can catalyze new ideas. They can kind of create collaboration in new ways. They can coach people so to help them to be the best they can be. And they can actually communicate a vision which inspires people to come together with a bigger purpose and with a passion in some ways to make the world better and the organization to be more successful too. So I want to start off with some stories. This is Tan Le. Tan Le, when she was 4 years old, she had to escape her home in Vietnam with her mother and her sisters, and she found herself on a refugee boat. She's traveling across the South China Sea, and they lost their power and they were drifting aimlessly. And then a British oil tanker came along and it offered to help them. And it took them to Australia. And in Australia, Tan Le saw a new life. Actually, when she arrived there, her mother asked her to kneel down and to touch the ground and say, this is your new opportunity, which perhaps you hadn't expected, but seize it for all you're worth. And so Tan Le kind of grew up in Australia as a refugee, but she kind of grasped every opportunity. She studied hard and she got various different qualifications. And today, she's actually leading a company which is more successful than any other in terms of harnessing the power of our brainwaves to control devices. So a brainwave technology company called Emotive. So just one example of a real person who has the personal passion to really start shaping a better future for themselves and ultimately grasping the new technologies to create a better future for others too. Jim Snaber is more of a traditional leader in some ways. He's the chairman of Siemens and Maersk. He says that a leader really today should not be looking at what happens next, but what happens after what happens next. And in that way, you can always be anticipating where you're going, anticipating what you need to do, and also be one step ahead of everybody else at the same time. So a leader is really about looking forwards, taking the organization to new places and seizing the new possibilities. We did a lot of research in terms of saying, well, what is leadership today? And I call this the new leadership DNA. And it really looks at the characteristics of a leader. Some of them will be familiar to you, but some of them are slightly different. So obviously we need leaders who can deliver results. They're impactful, they're collaborative, they're empathetic with their people, but they're also resilient to a world which has kind of got many ups and downs and challenges. So they deliver results, but I would call it more impact, more positive impact in the world. So it is profitability, but it's also achieving results for the wider society and the environment at the same time. But these leaders also need to be masters of change. So they're constantly curious, they're imaginative. They're constantly looking both how can they adapt themselves and what they believe in, but also adapt their organizations to a changing world. They're much more like entrepreneurs. And even in the largest organizations, you often need to be much more entrepreneurial than ever before. So constantly making change happen. But the real thing that I think defines a leader today is that they can create a better future. Better economically for the organization, but also better for the world at the same time. And that requires courage. It requires leaders to step up, to be more far-sighted, to be more open-minded in terms of how they achieve success, who they're achieving it for. and to be more inspiring so that they take their people with them and achieve not just profit or purpose, but achieve progress for the world at the same time. Another example is Zhang Xin. Now, I actually find myself at university with Xin. She was somebody, she'd grown up in Hong Kong actually. She'd worked for 3 years in a factory to earn enough money so that she could go to university on the south coast of England. I got there in much more fortunate ways. And she couldn't quite understand when she met all of these English students, why they just spend their time getting drunk and enjoying life. She was there because she'd invested more and she really wanted to study. Well, I'm where I am today and she's where she is. She's now known as the woman who created the Beijing skyline. So after her university career, she got a job. She started working with Goldman Sachs. She started working in investments, property investments, and to the point in which today she is the largest property investor and architect in terms of Chinese architecture and buildings. And so really thinking differently about the role of cities and how we can create more inspiring skylines and better workplaces for people. Another example of a CEO is Hamdi Ulukaya, and he's a Turkish guy who's created one of the most successful yogurt or Greek yogurt companies actually in the world based in America, so Chobani. And he calls himself the anti-CEO. Not because he doesn't want to be a CEO, but because he doesn't want to do what all the other CEOs do, which is just be obsessed with making money. He sees money as a way in which he can do more for the world at the same time. And he's actually pledged eventually to give all of his profits and all of his personal wealth to the migrants of the world, so people like himself. If we think about CEOs, what do they do today? They really do inspire people. I've had the good fortune to work closely with Microsoft. And Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, he's a phenomenally inspiring business leader. And I just want to recall the letter which he wrote or emailed to all of his staff on his first day when he stepped up to become the CEO of Microsoft in 2014. He said, "Today is a very humbling day for me. It reminds me of my very first day at Microsoft 22 years ago." So he'd already worked there and he stepped up to become the leader. "Like you, I had a choice about where to come to work. I came here because I believed Microsoft was the best company in the world, and I saw how clearly we empower people to do magical things with our creations and ultimately make the world a better place." And he continues. And then he talks about his vision for the future. And he talks about how he sees this future. Yes, it goes beyond the traditional products of Windows and so on, and selling licenses to individual, a world of cloud computing and artificial intelligence, which is now where he is taking Microsoft. And he says, let's build this future together. So it truly is a humble guy who's saying, I'm part of the team, but I have a vision, and it's a vision where we can all be much more successful. And Microsoft, having had many years of pretty stagnant performance before Satya came along, has suddenly seen itself shoot up to become one of the most successful technology or even just businesses in the world again, and the first company to become $1 trillion organization. Pablo Isla, he's the CEO of Inditex, which has brands like Zara and Mango, for example. More commonly, we know Inditex is a company which delivers fast fashion. And what Pablo Isla has learned over the years of being a business leader in many different roles in his organization is that gradually, as you progress through an organization, you work in a T-shape. You work up the vertical where you become more and more expert at your specialist function. So maybe you're in marketing or finance or supply chain or whatever it might be. You become more and more expert. You have all the answers. But when you become a true leader of the organization, a general manager, you work across the horizontal part of the T. And that means that you don't have all the answers. You're not the expert anymore. But what you do need to do is ask the questions, the better questions. And your questions are typically about how the organization works together, how it joins up, how the dots come together, and where it's going next. So leaders are not about having the answers. Leaders are actually about asking the better questions. And where are we going next is one of the most important questions which they can possibly ask. If you look at the transformation as you progress as a leader in organizations, when you become a junior leader, so maybe a supervisor of a team, or even managing your particular function, then you're still pretty short-term focused. But as you become a leader of the whole organization, a senior leader, you become much more long-term focused. You're looking at how value is created rather than just profits generated. And you're also looking at, where do we go next? Instead of transactional, you're much more transformational in terms of making change happen rather than just delivering short-term sales. Instead of being that functional expert, you're much more of a business generalist, or really a combining the best talents of the organization together in new and better ways. Instead of managing tasks, you're managing portfolios of projects, portfolios of ideas for the future. And instead of just delivering the quarterly results, you're stepping out of that cycle of constantly delivering the short term to saying, how can we actually move forwards and create something better which truly is valued by society as well as our shareholders? Ilkka Paananen, he's the CEO of Supercell, one of the world's leading gaming companies based in Finland. And he, interestingly, calls himself the world's least powerful CEO. And what he does is he organizes his teams into very self-managed groups. And so they're all experts. They all know their gamers. They all know the people who they're creating games for. They're all passionate about the games which they're building. And technically they have the skills to make fantastic games. They know what they're doing far better than he does. So he's not powerful. He can't tell them what to do. He doesn't have the answers. What his job is to do is to really provide the resources, provide the support, provide the encouragement, to provide the finance, to provide the facilities by which they can do their jobs better. And in many ways, that's what a leader actually does. But what he's also realized is that leaders, as they progress through an organization, they have to develop different skills as they have different roles. So in the initial stages, from leading yourself, everybody leads themselves in some ways, you need to start leading others. So that means collaborative skills. Then we move up over time, we start managing functions. So we move from managing individuals to managing teams, which is a different challenge, to managing entire functions with plans. But as we become a true business leader, it's not just the short term, we're thinking much more about the future orientation at the same time. And then as we move to the group leader, we're managing a portfolio of projects and maybe even businesses. And then we're managing systems as we become the highest level of leader. So we're constantly developing different skills, and leadership isn't one thing. Leadership is many different things, and being able to understand what are the skills and what is your role in the organization at different points is really quite interesting and important. Mary Barra, she understood what it meant to be a leader as she stood up to become the CEO of General Motors at a time when it was facing bankruptcy. And she said, actually, I've worked in this organization throughout my life, a bit like Satya Nadella, but we fundamentally have to change. And what the previous CEOs had done was they hadn't had the courage to step up and to make profound change. They'd constantly tried to drag out the old ways of working. They said, this is the way in which we had been successful in the past. This is when GM was great. And they were scared to really change that model. So they kept making very similar models with very similar processes, with very similar distribution structures, with very similar business models in terms of how their revenues were generated. And she said, we need to do something fundamentally different, because otherwise we won't succeed in a world of change, a world where the future is different from the past. The first thing she did was she looked actually short term, and she said, actually, a lot of the cars which we've delivered recently to our customers are not enough good quality. and she had a huge recall program where she refunded or she provided better cars to those customers. But then she started making some billion-dollar investments in future companies, which were actually, with their acquisitions, they're going to bring new capabilities, such as the ability to create driverless cars, which she now has, and onwards into clean energy and so on. But she also said, actually, my job is not to manage today. That's the job of my colleagues managing the specific teams. My job is actually to make sure that we do have a future and we know where we're going in that future. So what is your leadership style is often a question which many business leaders ask me. And it's tempting to have one leadership style where you copy kind of what you've seen before. It might be that great inspiring leader who stands up and gives the great inspiring talk to people. But you don't need to be like that, and actually that style doesn't suit everybody. So it might be a much more humble style, like we saw with Satya. It might be quite a quiet but engaging collaborative style, like you see with Pablo at Inditex. So be it in terms of inspiring styles or nurturing or engaging or commanding styles, you might need to use different styles at different times with different situations, different projects and different people. But there will be certain styles which are more relevant and suitable to you than others. So the real challenge is to kind of evolve and to learn yourself. What is your natural style which you feel comfortable with, but also how you have to adapt that in certain situations to different people. And a great example of that is Daniel Ek. So he was the entrepreneur who started Spotify as a one-person company, and then he brought in a series of friends, and they were incredibly successful. He loved what he did. But then he realized that he was becoming less and less effective. So he, as an entrepreneur, he's a technologist, he really understood the detail of things, but he wasn't that good at really engaging with the people, spending time listening to them and creating visions for the future. He knew where he wanted to take it, but he didn't really appreciate that other people needed to know that too. So he's an example of somebody who has quite a quiet style, quite a empathetic kind of one-to-one style with people. So most of the time he uses that. But he actually had to learn to be a bit visionary and a bit inspiring, a bit more extrovert, if you like, at the same time. So the challenge is really to find your natural style and then to add to it in relevant ways in the relevant moments. But ultimately, it's about achieving what you possibly can as a leader and moving yourself to be a better leader, transforming your leadership skills and your leadership style, if you like, over time to achieve your potential so that the organization can achieve their potential as well. Business transformation and personal transformation are really a dual track. You need to achieve both, or neither of them will be successful. So Korn Ferry, one of the world's leading headhunters, they actually have a very interesting leadership potential model, which is worth looking at, particularly if you want a new job. But thinking about, what is the potential of leaders and what are the kind of the attributes which they look for when they're looking for the strongest candidates. And they look for a series of traits, and we see some of those in our leadership DNA already, like curiosity, for example, and risk-taking and adaptability. That's the mental or the kind of emotional adaptability as well as the physical adaptability. But it's also certain competencies like the ability to articulate a future vision for the organization and having then the courage, if you like, the trait, to be able to do that. But it's also having the drive. So the drive to kind of want to be independent, to be entrepreneurial, but in the context of a large organization. The drive to constantly challenge the norms and to look for new possibilities and to say, how can they actually become plausible and actually things which we can make practical and profitable? So thinking about these leadership challenges, how can I move forwards and achieve my leadership potential, is actually the key to enabling my teams and my business to achieve its potential at the same time. We lead in a world of incredible change. And so it's not that fixed world, that stable world, that predictable world. We now live in a world which is incredibly uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So how can we kind of be leaders of change? That means that we need a North Star, like people sailing across the oceans, but also we need to make decisions as we go. As Jim Snaber says, we need to have dreams and we need to have details, but in the middle, between the dream and the detail, we need to allow our people to do amazing things themselves. Brené Brown, she has a great book where she talks about how you need to dare to lead in organization today. And she talks about the first step in terms of daring to lead is actually opening yourself up, being more vulnerable, if you like, which means kind of opening yourself up to the messy world of how you're thinking, but also the messiness with the way in which you see the world. You know, we don't have all the answers. It's about asking yourself the questions as well as asking others. So don't try to avoid vulnerability. Don't be numb to vulnerability, as she says, but actually use that vulnerability to create greater empathy with people. You know, it's okay not to know, but the challenge is to learn. The challenge is to explore. The challenge is to try new ideas and to encourage your other people to do that too. So really, vulnerability she talks about is actually the place where you can enjoy life more. You can be more happy. You can express more gratitude. You can be more human. So showing yourself, showing your human side, opening yourself up to your people will actually engage them much more, but it also allow you to open your mind up to new possibilities, to explore new questions, as well as to explore new answers. So have the courage, that's what leaders really need, to step up in today's new world. And there's probably no more bigger moment than right now in a world of seismic change, huge challenges, huge uncertainty, but also incredible opportunity to create a better future, a business future which is more profitable, but a business future which can do more for society and the world at the same time. So how can you think differently about where you're going? I love coming back to 3 buckets of courage because I think courage is the real thing which Brené Brown's talking about. One bucket is the courage to try things. You've got to start. You've got to put yourself out there. You've got to experiment. You've got to try something. Have the courage to try and, probably fail first time, but to keep trying and to find a new course. You've got to have the courage to trust other people, to trust situations, to trust new partners. So being able to trust people. And it's also having the courage to tell, the courage to take those things which you feel inside and to express them, to articulate them in new ways. If you can see a new possibility, a new vision, if you imagine something, if you have a passion for something, the ability to articulate that clearly and therefore to inspire people and to align people, all working with you in a courageous new direction. So now is the time for leaders, not just to be ordinary, but to be extraordinary. So this is part of my new book. It's called Business Recoded, and it starts off with the idea of how as a leader can you really create enlightened progress, futuristic growth, creating markets, not just competing in them. How can you be ingenious in your innovation? Ecosystems to achieve more by working together with many different partners, much more dynamically in a changing world. How can you transform your business and also sustain change as the world keeps changing and to do it in sustainable, i.e. enduring, but also responsible ways? And how can you be that extraordinary leader? In the book, we talk about leaders having the courage to lead a better future, and that being the pinnacle, really, of their DNA and all the other things which are required for them to be successful and their organizations to be successful in this incredible changing world. And that's based on actually 49 different codes, which are taken by looking at all the world's best companies and all the world's best leaders today, like some of the ones I've just talked about, deconstructing what each of them do into a series of codes, and then helping you to reconstruct those codes in a relevant, practical and joined up way for your organization, and deciding where are you going to take yourself and your team to in the future. So Business Recoded is about many different things, and there's 5 programs in this series. The other ones are about the future, growth, innovation and work. But for now, be bold, be brave, be brilliant, and thank you for watching.